Well, hello there and welcome to this discussion. I'm Joe Prevedello. We're speaking about wildlife and tourism in the ACT, and joining me for this discussion is Neil Hermes, the proprietor of Canberra Guided Tours. And Neil, what we're going to be speaking about for the next few minutes is one of your tours that you run through the business, the Best of Wildlife Tour. Give us an overview.
Well, thanks, Joe. Yes, we every afternoon we take a tour out to see some of the wildlife that we can find so easily around the edges of the ACT. And we visit a local reserve. We leave in the afternoon about 3 o'clock. As many people would know, a lot of wildlife in Australia generally is nocturnal, or more accurately becomes more active just on sunset. So it's not nocturnal necessarily, but active around sunset and sunrise. So you see a lot more wildlife in terms of, animals like kangaroos and wombats and those sorts of mammals on twilight. So what we like to do is we like to leave later in the day. So it's why we leave about 3 o'clock, or depending on whether it's summer or winter time. And we make our way to a local reserve. And as we enter the reserves, we see usually large numbers of grey kangaroos. Now, people talk about kangaroos, and they tend to talk about kangaroos as being sort of one thing. But of course, kangaroos are made up of, the kangaroo family is made up of about 50 species of animals. The big red kangaroo that everybody knows, the big grey kangaroo that many people know, but then a whole range of other species, all the way down to species the size of a rabbit or even a rat, which are species of kangaroos. So what we do on the afternoon tour is that we try and see as many different species of kangaroos, for example, as we can. Grey kangaroos are abundant in the ACT, and so we can almost guarantee that we're going to see a lot of them and see them quite closely. But one of the things I really like to try and find for people is things like swamp wallabies, which are about half the size of a large kangaroo, almost jet black. They live deep in the wet forests, and we often will see those on our afternoon tour. And the red-necked wallaby, which is a sort of grey-coloured wallaby, half the size of a grey kangaroo, and frequently we'll find those as well. So they're feature animals that we're looking for in terms of mammals. And the other highlight, of course, is seeing the wildlife the birds that we see as part of the wildlife tour.
Well, that's right. It's not just the kangaroos or the bird life, but there's an array of different animals that you'll see as part of the Best of Wildlife tour. And I think, you can go on a wildlife tour in a lot of different places. But would I be right in saying that one of the unique things about this particular tour is the variety that you see?
And look, to be fair, I mean, if you go on a safari in Africa in the middle of the day and you see an elephant and a lion and a cheetah and a hippopotamus, that's a pretty good day out. And you can do that in places in Africa. All those animals are out in the daytime where you can see them easily. Australian wildlife tends to be more, the mammals tend to be more concealed. So it is difficult in Australia to see a large number of different species of mammals in particular on a tour. But the tour that we run in Canberra is about one of the best you can do in terms of the variety, as you say, of mammals. Now, one of the things we really do like to try and see too is a platypus. And many people would know that there are two sorts of mammals that lay eggs, echidnas, which look like a sort of hedgehog, and platypus, which are like a Australian version of a beaver, if you like, that live in ponds and rivers. Both are difficult to see generally. On our tours, we sometimes see echidnas, but it's usually in the spring months when they're more active. But we can more often than not see platypus. So that gives quite a good variety of things that we can see on this tour in terms of the mammals. In terms of birds, there are a whole range of species of birds that we'll see. And of course, birds aren't sort of nailed to the ground, and we can't guarantee we'll see one every day. But on this particular tour, it's guaranteed that you'll see a variety of species of birds, be it a range of different species of parrots, wedge-tailed eagles. You may hear lyrebirds. We may be lucky to see a lyrebird. We frequently see bowerbirds, the ones that make the bower on the ground and display with the blue collected things that they have. And, more often than not, we'll see emus as well. And emus are the large, for international visitors who might, to Australia, who might not know the bird. In southern continents, there are these large, long-legged, flightless birds, ostrich in Africa, rheas in South America, and emus in Australia. And we have them quite common in the ACT and regularly seen on our afternoon tour.
So just with regards to the mechanics of the tour, depending on whether it's summer or winter, and as you mentioned, you do like to try to have the tour as late as possible in the day.
That's true.
To allow for a higher amount of animal and bird activity.
Yeah.
So the tour can pick up from major hotels in Canberra,
Pick up all around
in Canberra.
Yep, pick up all around town. As I say, it's 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and that timing means that we're seeing the activity of the mammals as it's later into the afternoon. And what that means, of course, is we're then heading back as after dark. So once dark has fallen, which is about the busiest time, we then return to Canberra and we get back into Canberra a little bit after dark. The travel time is not more than 30 minutes, 40 minutes from the city. So it's very close, it's handy, and it's all on bitumen roads, and it's all in comfortable vehicles. There's very little walking involved. One of the reserves we visit has a captive display of koalas, which we will have a look at. That requires a little bit of walking. And sometimes a little bit of walking to see platypus, but nothing that's particularly strenuous. And as I say, all on bitumen roads.
So invariably, you'll leave Canberra, as you say, there'll be about a half an hour drive, and you'll most often head to a reserve south of the city called the Tidbinbilla Nature Reserve.
That's our major destination, and that'll be the destination for most of the afternoon tours. However, we do go to other reserves on other occasions.
And when we say reserve, we've got to make it clear that the animals are not in captivity.
No, well,
they are living in the wild.
Other than the koalas, which they have in a captive situation, and they're trying to release them back into the wild. They are all wild species, wild individuals. That's correct. Yeah.
So on the tour, you'll head to Tidbinbilla Nature Reserve. First up, you'll get an opportunity normally to see a lot of kangaroos.
Yes.
But normally, what is the process of the tour once you get to Tidbinbilla?
Well, I suppose it really does depend on the activity of the animals that we see. So we take the opportunities as they come along. By the time we've reached the reserve with the group that's in the vehicle, we will sometimes get an idea of what priority species people are really keen to see, and so we'll make particular effort to try and see particular things. But we're always at the mercy of what's about and what animals are active on a particular day. And as I say, if we see emus at the entrance to the reserve, well, emus are the first thing on the agenda, and we will probably get out of the vehicle and take some photographs. And look, because it's a reserve, most of the animals are relatively used to having people around. They're not tame.
So it is safe, though.
Oh, perfectly safe. The animals aren't nervous about people being around. They're wild animals. So you may well have seen an emu or a kangaroo in a zoo, but here you're seeing the animals wild. And frequently it'll be grey kangaroos that we see first. But it may be, bowerbirds or emus or redneck wallabies that we see.
And let's talk a little bit about the physical environment of that area where the tour travels to, the Tidbinbilla Nature Reserve. It's essentially a typical sort of dry mountain Australian forest for most part, isn't it?
Well, you're showing your lack of biological knowledge a little bit there, Joe, because in fact what happens is as you travel, and I think in inches when I think about rainfall, you're travelling from an area in Canberra where we're about 20-inch rainfall area, and we're at about 600 metres above. Here I am mixing metres and inches, 600 metres above sea level. By the time we get out to Tidbinbilla, 30, 40 minutes out of town, we've got to a 40 and 50-inch rainfall area, and we've got an elevation of a couple of hundred metres on the city. So basically it becomes wetter. So the forests that we get in the mountains to the west of the city, including Tidbinbilla, are wetter forests than we get around the city. And that's one of the things that contributes to the richness of the wildlife that we see there. It's not rainforest, it's what we call wet sclerophyll forest, but it's much wetter than the drier woodlands that we would get around Canberra. And of course, that's interesting in itself. People can see that transition as we travel out. We cross the Murrumbidgee River, which of course is one of the great rivers that drains sort of inland Australia and goes out into the Murray and is part of the Murray-Darling Basin, and where Canberra's water comes from. So we see that landscape as we go out. So that the drive out and back to the reserve is also interesting. There's a variety of vegetations and landscapes that we can see as we go.
So if people are coming to Canberra, they're visiting Canberra, tell them why. Why would they go on a tour with Canberra Guided Tours, the Best of Wildlife tour, when they could travel to these places and try to look for animals themselves? What is the advantage, aside from having your transport taken care of?
Sure. Why
would they go with somebody like you or one of your guides?
Okay, so it's very simple. You can always take yourself into a bushland area or whatever on your own, unless you're with someone who knows the bushland that you're at. You won't see nearly as much as you would on your own. Or you won't see on your own. You won't see nearly as many species. With a talented guide, you are going to see vastly more in the bush than you would by just taking yourself on a tour. I mean, the same applies when you visit a city. You know, you can drive around a city, but you won't learn about the city. Sure, you can get a book, and fortunately in a city a building will stay still and you can look it up and you can read about it before it's gone anywhere. But with wildlife, of course, you don't know what that bird was, what that animal was that you just saw. And you can't quickly find out another way. You really need a guide with you to be able to interpret the place that you're in and to find the things that, you might be particularly interested in, or take you to a special place where you may have a better chance of seeing a particular species. So, look, it's chalk and cheese, really, if you're on a tour to see wildlife, between doing it on your own, unless you're a competent wildlife biologist yourself, or going with a guide who knows the area.
So on the Best of Wildlife tour, would it be fair to say, and of course there are never guarantees about what you'll see, but is it fair to say that you will see grey kangaroos?
Yes, definitely.
You will see cockatoos?
Yes, definitely.
You will see koalas?
Yes, but given that they are in captivity in Tidbinbilla Reserve, but there are wild koalas around as well. So yes and no.
Emus?
Emus 50% of the time, I'd say.
Platypus?
Platypus 80% of the time.
Yeah, so you're not going to see everything all of the time, but
No.
for most of the tours you'll get a very good overview
that's true.
of the fauna in the region.
That's true. And look, sometimes we're lucky and you see everything on a trip. Other times, it might be overcast and it might be rainy or whatever, and things aren't as easy. But with a qualified guide, with an experienced guide, you're going to see much more than you would have otherwise. And for the average Australian who doesn't know much about the bush, a half-day trip out into the bushland around Canberra with a Canberra Guided Tours will give you an insight that you didn't have. And if you're an international visitor, well, it's just a compulsory trip, really.
And just before we wrap up, just to dig a little bit deeper, for an avid bird watcher, what are some of the species that you might be able to see on this tour? Some of the rarest species that you might be able to spot.
Okay, so the rarest species we get in the wet forests around the ACT, the ones that bird watchers will really want to see, are things like lyrebirds, pilot birds, cicada birds, the red-browed tree creepers. There's a suite of species that are only found in that wet sclerophyll forest. Olive whistlers. So they're the ones that are really sort of high on the I'd like to see if you're a real, you're a bird ticker. But then there's dozens of other species that are also in that forest that are of interest to people as well.
And then obviously at the end of the tour you can take people back to their accommodation, and it's been a great day.
It's been a great day, and they'll have seen something, and it's a comfortable trip. As I said before, it's all on bitumen roads. It's a comfortable afternoon drive. You haven't felt like you've been out and back hours in the vehicle. So it's a comfortable afternoon and early evening trip, and you're back in time to have a shower and go out to dinner.
Well, thank you, Neil, for this discussion. If you're travelling to Canberra, look up Canberra Guided Tours and seriously consider their Best of Wildlife experience.
Thanks, Joe.
Thanks.